Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and no prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Hello, I'm Diane Morgan. If you know who I am, you know who I am. If you don't, who cares? I'm here to explain Italian Time, a holiday phenomenon where Italians throw away their clocks and gather for eternity with San Pellegrino. I've been at this party so long that I've eaten 5 courses, hugged someone's grandma twice, and been offered a job in the family restaurant. So this holiday season, make sure to bring enough San Pellegrino to last you through the meal, the after meal, and the entire goodbye ritual. San Pellegrino, holiday on Italian Time.
Do you ever think, why me? Because so many people I feel have, and it ebbs and flows, like a victim mindset. But I just don't see that in you.
I gotta say, I do not think why me at all. I think why not me? And I think that in 2 respects, because when the why me, I think can happen kind of on both ends of the spectrum, if you will, meaning people think, why me? Why should this happen to me? Why am I suffering? You know, there's that end. And then I also think when we look at our success, people think, well, who am I? Who am I to put myself out there? Who am I to why? That's not going to happen for me. And I kind of feel like, why not me? First of all, I look around. I don't even have to go to, other far-flung parts of the world to see intense suffering. It's everywhere. So why should I think that I'm immune from that? Why not me? But then I also think when, you asked earlier, and I talked about confidence, that I'm so grateful that my parents instilled in me. And I think, why not me? So, I talk to a lot of people, for example, who are like, oh, I want to write a book, but who wants to know my story? And I'm like, why not? Right? So I don't think why me, but I know where you're coming from with the question is, why should all of this tragedy happen to me? And why not me? It's happening to a lot, there's a lot of suffering.
There is no hood like parenthood. Hi, I'm Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm a former CNN journalist, mom of 3, including twins, and host of That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast. Now, if I had $1 every time I heard, gee, you have your hands full. On my show, I interview change makers on their life lessons, legacy, and superpower of intuition, which I call our Mom Sense and Dad Sense. I've had the privilege of working with Mom 2.0, March of Dimes, and the White House, and have had some pretty amazing parents on my show.
Hey, what's up? I'm Kelly Rowland.
Hi, this is Chelsea Clinton. It's me, Bobby Brown. Can't wait to share my story.
That's Total Mom Sense is a production of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube so you never miss an episode. To join my tribe, visit that'stotalmomsense.com and follow me on Instagram at Kanika Chadda Gupta. Now let's dive in to today's episode.
Hi, everyone. This episode is for the sandwich generation. Many of us are caregivers to our young ones and our aging parents and maybe even our siblings. And it's so important for us to have conversations around caregiving and grieving and self-preservation. I am so honored to be joined by my friend, Jessica Fein. She is an author, advocate, and an executive who built a global multi-billion-dollar education and childcare company. She's written over 100 columns for the Boston Globe, HuffPost, and Psychology Today, to name a few. She's a devoted mother and a warrior to her daughter, Dalia, whom she lost to a rare disease in 2022. And she wrote her memoir, Breathtaking, in her honor, and to help families navigate the intricacies of caregiving, whether it be for their children who have underlying conditions or any other loved ones. Jessica serves on the board of directors of Mito Action. She is the mother of 3, whom she and her husband, Rob, adopted from Guatemala, and they live in Framingham, Massachusetts, with their quasi-service dog, who trained himself. Jessie, thank you so much for joining me on That's Total Mom Sense today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. So I'm curious, what was the young child Jessica like? Were you always this nurturer and go-getter? I want to know her. I want to meet her.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I would say I was a go-getter. She was a go-getter, but not necessarily a natural nurturer. I was the youngest of three. I was very comfortable in that position, which was there were a lot of older people looking out for me, be that parents, older sisters friends. I didn't babysit. I didn't particularly, play with dolls. So I never really felt like I was a natural nurturer.
What were some of the biggest life lessons that your parents passed on to you and your sisters?
My parents instilled in me a sense of confidence that I think has really served me well. They were very gushing, shall we say, with their love and their praise. And I'm grateful for that. And I think sometimes I sense that I might be overdoing it with my own kids with my gushingness, to use a very technical word. But I think it really did make me feel like I just felt secure. I think maybe also being the youngest gave me that feeling of security. I had so many people looking out for me. So that was one lesson. And then I think the other lesson that I got from my parents was it's incumbent on us to do what we can to change the world. And that sounds like a big, huge lesson to be talking about at the dinner table. But that was the context in which I grew up. My father really was a change maker, whether that was founding an organization to address hunger worldwide or founding an organization to address literacy. So this was kind of dinner table conversation. And it was about what are you going to do to make your impact, to make your difference. And I thought that was a really big charge. Like I wasn't necessarily ready to sign up for that. I'm like, change the world. I just want to get through 7th grade, Right. But that was the context in which I grew up. We are expected to make a difference.
Wow. I think that's amazing. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall because there's a ripple effect, and even just one human being can create a big impact in the world. Tell us about how that parlayed into the career path you chose and some of the milestones there.
This notion that we're here to change the world felt like a huge charge, as I was saying. And one of the things that I learned is that changing the world doesn't have to look big and huge, that the impact we have on one individual can change the world. And so that was something that I think I learned over time. And starting with my writing way back when I was in my 20s, I wrote a book about graduating from college and making the transition to the real world. And so I think even then, this idea that we could maybe, make a difference for one reader, that meant something to me. And then, of course, I spent my corporate career in an organization that is very focused on how do we support employers to care for their employees' families? How do we provide the care and education for our employees so that they're more invested in our success as an organization? And ultimately, again, it's that idea of caring and of noticing what is happening at the individual level. And that's always been very interesting to me, that if we can make that one-to-one connection, make that one-to-one impact, that, as you said, that does have ripple effects.
And now let's get into this beautiful book. What was the inspiration for, let's start with the title, Breathtaking?
The title really means 3 things to me. So for one, my daughter's breath was quite literally taken away by the disease that she had, MERFF Syndrome. She lost the ability to breathe on her own and was ventilator dependent from age 9 to 17 when she passed away. So this idea of breathtaking, and that's why I used it as 2 words. But another really important twist on that word is my personal transformation over the course of this book and over the course of mothering all of my kids, and Dalia in particular, perhaps, which is sometimes we just need to be in the moment, slow down and take a breath. That was not my natural inclination. My natural inclination was like, boom, 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 we're going to get to the next thing. We're going to do everything fast. I talk fast, I eat fast, I read fast, I work fast. One thing that you learn when you're in this high stakes parenting is you got to be really present. And for me, that was about slowing down and taking a breath. And then the third was the idea of beauty. And I think my daughter was the most beautiful human being I've had the honor of knowing, but also that within the context of so much sickness and tragedy, we worked to create a little corner of beauty in our lives, and a corner that was a breathtaking place to be. So I love the three meanings of the word of the words breathtaking.
I want to touch on, various forms of caregiving and grief, because you've been through it all. And, I encourage my listeners to read this book where you get to really see how you articulate it through your storytelling. But you lost your sister, Nomi, very suddenly. And it's such a jarring thing. There's this TED Talk I came across with Jeffrey Kluger, who he spoke about the sibling bond. And it's something we take for granted. He says, our parents leave us too early. Our spouse and our children come too late, but our siblings are the ones who are with us for the entire ride. Tell us about who Nomi was.
Well, to start, she was my best friend. And I think that those of us who have a sibling who's also a best friend, gosh, what a blessing that is. I mean, that is such a unique relationship. And Nomi and I, so I was the youngest of three. Nomi was 3 years older than me. So the good thing about that was we were often in school together. And she, when she was a senior in high school, I was a freshman, and that was pretty awesome. And we just, look, I never had lived a day on the earth without my sisters. And I so saw myself in relation to my sisters, as I think we do. We see ourselves in relation to our family placement. I was the youngest of three, right? And that was part of my identity. And so Nomi was brilliant. She died at 30. She had 2 master's degrees. She had so many people who walked this earth believing that they were her best friend, because she had so many best friends. And mostly, I think her special gift was when she was talking to you, you were the only person there. She really had an ability to make people understand how special they were. And she just was friends with all the different kinds of people. She was kind of a bridge for many, many people. And I was just happy to go along in her wake. So when I was 27 and she was 30 and she died suddenly, that rocked my world and changed my worldview more than any other loss that came after. And I say that even more than losing my own daughter. I lost 3 parents, and I ended up losing both of my sisters and, of course, my daughter. But losing Nomi was the one that made me understand how random it is, that punctured the bubble that I had been living in. And what I say in the book is I started to see the world not through the hazy sheen of a bubble, but through the clarity of the puncture, because now that loss was underlying everything else that came later.
Yes. And Nomi was a caregiver, and she was taking care of her daughter Liat when she collapsed suddenly. And I mean, nobody wants to get that phone call. How are David and Liat now?
Liat is actually, you asked earlier about my history with nurturing, and Liat was the first person that I feel like I nurtured, because I jumped in. Liat was 1 year old. And my husband, Rob, and I moved into walking distance of David and Liat's home, David being Nomi's husband. They're terrific. Liat lives in New York, and, it's many, many years later. She works in the nonprofit world. David remarried and went on to have a family with many children, and his wife adopted Liat, and we're very close as well. So talk about a blended family with a weird backstory. But Liat is in many ways, my pride and joy. She's not mine, but she's my pride and joy.
100%. I love that. I want to know how someone can cope when a sibling passes away. How do they get through that grief that is going to just bubble up randomly?
I think about Nomi. So this was decades ago. I think about Nomi every single day. She is still so much a part of who I am. So I don't think of it as necessarily getting through it. There's no coming out another side, but it's integrating. And it's how do we integrate the loss? And I would say that's the case for any major loss. But Nomi is in so many ways woven into who I am as a person. And there's a piece of me that understood, not consciously, but okay, I have two choices here. I can curl up in the fetal position and like get in bed. And that would have been really easy and comfortable. Or I can try and I hesitate to say live for both of us because that's like so grandiose and weird, but I am very aware that my sister only got to live until age 30. And I don't want to cower and remove myself in response to that loss. Instead, I want to kind of carry on her behalf as well. And maybe there's a little bit of the magic of her that I can, bring to the world on her behalf. Maybe.
I want to share about the number 18 and its significance, not only in Judaism, but in your life. September 18th is when you found Dalia. And it was after 18 years of knowing your husband, Rob. Take us back to that special time when you met her.
Dalia was our second child, and we met Dalia at a younger age than we met either of our other two kids. So the way at the time adoptions worked in Guatemala is you went to Guatemala and met your baby and filled out paperwork, and then you had to leave and then go back to pick them up. So we met Dalia when she was 3 months old. And this was petrifying for me. Magical and petrifying because my eldest child was 15 months when we met. 3 months was a little baby. I had no idea what I was doing, right? And there was no you start off as a brand newborn and you kind of grow with them. Like I was handed a 3 month and I was just so scared. On the other hand, she was from that age the most glorious, sweetest child. And you talk about love at first sight, and I know all moms feel this way, right? You just don't know until that person, whether they're 15 months as my firstborn was, or, 15 seconds, when they're placed in your arm and they're yours, it's just a different kind of heart opening. And that's what I felt with Dalia. But then, of course, we had to leave. And that was hard. We had to be away for 3 months. However, I did have the opportunity to meet the family, the foster family she was with. And because we had been through an adoption already, we understood that the whole crazy proposition could work, right? That we could meet this child in another country and she would become ours.
Wow. I know we could do a whole kind of episode on this, but you and your sister Rachel adopted, and she had her baby in New Hampshire. Tell us about the adoption process. Is there anything that, again, for those listening, should know that this is something to be wary of, or definitely do such and such, especially whether it's in the country or outside?
Yeah. And it is really interesting because Rachel and I were going through for infertility at the same time. And so we were 8 years apart, but we were going through that together. And then we both kind of came to the notion of adoption at the same time. But she knew she wanted to stay and adopt domestically because she wanted a newborn. And in fact, she brought her son Jake home when he was less than 24 hours old. And we didn't care. As soon as we decided to adopt, we were like, we're going international. This is, it kind of became more of an adventure for us, that piece of it. But one of the things that was really interesting to me in the adoption process is you have to go through all kinds of home studies and parenting classes and all these things, right? Like if you give birth biologically, you get pregnant and you have a baby and nobody's kind of questioning it. But of course, when you adopt, there's so much proving yourself. And one of the things we had to do was go to this group with prospective adoptive parents and learn and talk through things. I don't know, it was like 2 days or something. And one of the parents was asking questions about quote unquote guarantees. How do I know that my child will be healthy? How do I know that my child will be A, B, and C? And what if they're not? And I sat there and I was so shocked by this, right? Because I think there's an illusion, especially if you come to adoption after infertility. Now there will be some control. I can choose the country. I can choose the gender, perhaps. I can choose the age. I have some control here. And I knew by then that we have no control. I knew by then that it was an illusion, because how do you know if the child's going to be healthy? What a ludicrous question. My sister and I shared DNA, and I had just been through the loss of her. So, I think for adoptive parents, it's kind of a crapshoot, and you go with it, and you do fall in love with the child. You do have every same parental instinct and every same parental bond. But whether you have a child biologically or whether you adopt, you're bound together forever. And there is not a really much control in either situation. And I think that we felt finally, because, infertility, you feel so out of control, and loss after loss, month after month. For us, it was a 5-year journey, that we felt the certainty of knowing adoption would end with a baby placed in our arms gave us an illusion of control.
Wow. I want to now touch on Dalia's journey and her life. My first exposure to rare disease was when, my mom and I went to Blockbuster and we rented Lorenzo's oil. I was only in elementary school or something at the time when I saw it, and it had this impact on me. And you were a fierce advocate for Dalia through MERFF Syndrome. Tell us about, how you kind of stepped up to the plate and were this warrior truly on her behalf, uncovering everything to do with the disease and her care.
Yeah. And of course, and I love that you rented Lorenzo's oil at Blockbuster. I mean, that puts us in such a specific era. And I think for all of us rare disease parents, we think about Lorenzo's oil and we think our kid is going to be the next Lorenzo's oil. I talk in the book about it. I'm going to, come up with Dalia's tincture, right? Like, it's going to be, I will personally cure this disease. So yeah, Dalia was 5 when she was diagnosed with an ultra-rare form of mitochondrial disease. Later, she got a secondary diagnosis, and she became one of 6 in the world who had this dual diagnosis. And, I knew nothing. I knew nothing about what this meant. I didn't really understand what a degenerative disease meant. I didn't even really know what mitochondria were. I mean, I was in branding and creative. I was not in any way, shape, or form in the medical field or the research field. But you know how parents are, and I will say, I think mothers in particular, okay, this is what we're faced with. We'll fix it. We'll cure it. And that was going to be me. So I dove into trying to find any study, any doctor, anywhere in the world who was studying mitochondrial disease. Nobody was studying MERFF syndrome, or very few. When you have a rare disease, that's the thing. You can't find people who are really investing in the specific disease that your child has, which is why so many parents become not only advocates, but become the ones who start the research on that particular disease. Because at the end of the day, it's where the money is, and rare disease is not where the money is. So for Dalia, she was 5, and we had a diagnosis of MERFF syndrome, and I really just poured myself into what I was very comfortable with, which is the how do we fix this approach. Despite what I tried to do and despite trying to find a study, the disease progressed. And lo and behold, I couldn't. Here was something that really was out of my control and I couldn't fix. But there was a whole lot that I could create in terms of her care and that I could control in terms of what her day-to-day experience was. And so at some point along the way, you stop looking at how am I going to personally, as a brand and creative person, cure this disease that all these brilliant people haven't cured. And instead, how am I going to create a day that's meaningful for my kid who just wants to be a kid?
I know in an interview, you shared that it came to a point where she needed 24/7 care. You couldn't even go to the bathroom without like someone being in the room with her. But you made it a point to carve time for yourself, and you and Rob decided that there were days that you had off. And I think that's so important for those who are caregiving. Can you shed light on that?
Yeah. So as you said, Dalia became what's called an eyes-on patient from 9 to 17 for 8 years. She couldn't be alone. My husband, myself, or a nurse trained specifically in her care had to have our eyes on her 24/7. As you said, if it was just the two of us, I was wheeling her into the bathroom with me, or you couldn't leave the room for a moment. And so in that intensity, it was so critical for us to have some time to replenish ourselves. And so I was very, very, very fortunate that I had a partner in my husband, because I do know some people who go through this without a partner, and you need all the help, all the hands, all the support you can get. But because of that, because we had each other, we were able to give ourselves a little bit of time to ourselves each week. And I will say the idea for this came from a couple we know who had one child who was healthy. So I don't think this is something that we only need to reserve for, intense parenting situations. This couple did this once a week. They each had their quote unquote night off. And when they told us about it, Rob and I were like, oh my God, why haven't we been doing this all along? And it became such an important point, not only of the week in terms of that specific night, Thursday nights was my night off, but all week I knew Thursday was coming. And to have that time to myself, to go out with a friend, to go out by myself, often I'd go out and just sit and write, but to know that this was time where I could be me, not be Dalia's mom, Dalia's nurse, my other kid's mom, all the many, many, many hats that all parents wear. But remembering, okay, Jesse, who am I and what do I want to do with these 3 hours, And it's not much, but it really was a way to kind of fill my own tank.
Wow. And I mean, you're building a global organization at the same point. I'm like amazed. I know that there's non-negotiables for making strides at work and being completely devoted to your family.
My husband and I kept working through the whole time period, and that was really important to us. I have to say, now, just to be clear, we didn't have a choice financially, but I actually have written a few pieces about what if I did have a choice, because I have encountered a lot of judgment, and I think that all of us encounter judgment, whatever we decide. If we decide to stay home, then people are like, oh, why aren't you working? And then if we decide to work, how could you do that? Whatever choice we make, we're so good at judging each other. And I encountered some very overt judgment from people who said, how in the world can you work outside of the home when you have such intensity on the home front? And I think that actually working made me a better caregiver. And this is from my experience, and I totally hats off to every single person who's making it work, however they're making it work. For me, getting that time where I could go and I could be in a much less intense situation, the workplace, helped me be fully present when I was home. And that was so important. And it did help me feel like I was still me. And it did, it was a little bit kind of Twilight Zone-ish when I was away from the family, because you go through this world and you go through your day and people aren't understanding all that you're carrying. And of course, that's always a little bit isolating. And yet it's also normalizing. So for me, and to be clear, I would like to say I was personally building the organization. I was, on the marketing side and the branding side, and there were plenty of people, and it's a big company, and I played my role for sure. But having that team and that work community was important too. It was again a very normalizing thing, and something that made me feel good and made me feel like, here's something I know how to do. I mean, on the home front, half the time I had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying my hardest. But at work, you kind of know the drill.
You do. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And it's so important to realize you can't fill from an empty cup. And so, yeah, I totally understand that. I want to have you share how friends can be true like supporters, because we're all going to go through some level of grief and loss in our life for one another. And there's certain things that like aren't just faux pas. It's like, just don't go there. So when you have a child that you're taking care of, tell us like how a friend can be a friend.
Yes. And I'm so glad that you asked this question, because it's something that I was just as weird and awkward with grief as most people are before I had been through it. And it always amazes me, because when I think about like, what are the things we're all going to go through in our lifetime? Like chances are we are all going to experience grief. And yet we are so uncomfortable around it. And for sure, we're uncomfortable around disability. I mean, those are like the two things that make us feel uncomfortable. And so when you see a friend who's grieving or a friend who's caregiving on the precipice, as I was, how can you show up? And I think there are many ways, right? So one is simply that, showing up. I think a lot of us feel so awkward that we're like, well, I'm just not even going to go there, And look, we're feeling isolated because our life doesn't look like what we thought it was going to look like, or because we're grieving, or because, we're trying to figure out so many things and keep so many balls in the air. And so we're already feeling isolated. And when friends kind of fade away, that is so painful. Show up and admit that you don't know what to do. And again, I think that this is the same for a friend you're trying to support on the precipice, or a friend who's grieving, which is to say, I want to be here for you. I'm here for you. I'm not sure I know what to say, but I'm here. And I would take that any day over somebody who says, well, God only gives you what you can handle, or, you're so strong, or, all these platitudes. And of course, people mean well. Of course they do. But when you're feeling so vulnerable and so raw, even when somebody means well, it can just land the wrong way. Just be here for me. Just be here with me. And I think that is universal, right? You show up and you sit with somebody in their sadness. Don't necessarily try to fix it, because there are things that you can't fix. And we want somebody to say, I'm here with you, and this is horrible, and this stinks, and I recognize it, and this is awful, and I'm here. And so, for example, we had a couple of friends, a couple, who all through those 8 years when we really couldn't be out and about in the way that we had been before, would drive 45 minutes and show up for dinner frequently, bringing dinner to our house to set up a nice dinner for us to have together. They showed up. Somebody else really focused on our other kids, because of course there's only so much of you to go around, and it is hard to make sure that you're nurturing and parenting as you want to all the kids. So remembering the siblings. And I think that's really true in grief also. People so descend on the quote unquote main character in the loss. And the siblings are our main characters as well. And I think they often get overlooked. And then I think not asking, is there anything I can do? Because when you're on the receiving end of that question, of course the person means well, but that puts the burden on you to figure out what can somebody do? And also, we don't really know what you're prepared to do. Do you mean like, can you give me a gift card to Grubhub? Or do you mean, can you babysit my other kids? So instead to say something like, here are 5 things I could do. Would any of these be useful to you? Or I'm here this Saturday afternoon. I'm coming over for 3 hours. Put me to work. Give me your to-do list, right? There are so many ways you can just step in and not make the person who's already suffering try and solve another problem of what is it you can do.
Yeah. What about like gifts or gestures, what's appropriate?
So I will share with you the single most meaningful thing anybody did for us. This is an astounding thing. It's maybe not something that's going to work in every situation, but maybe we can, glean what was so special about it and apply that in another way. But my husband has a colleague who, about a month or two after Dalia died, came to our house one day with a big truck filled with gardening supplies and planted a Dalia garden in front of our house. He did it really quietly in terms of just, telling my husband, of course, this is what he wanted to do and would this be okay? And what happened is, first of all, I fell in love with the Dalia flower, which I hadn't really even known much about before, which is kind of ironic. I just liked the name. But my husband now, 2 years later, has grown this into the most magnificent, magnificent garden. He pours his heart into it. We have dahlias around the house all the time when they're in season, and it just brings a smile to our face. And I just love that he did something, again, that was just so personal and so kind of quiet, and also that lasts over time. So I do love the idea of something that can be planted and that can stand that test of time. Not everybody's kid has the name of a flower, but whatever, some kind of thing that will last over time, I think is absolutely gorgeous. On the more practical front, a lot of people gave us gift cards to Grubhub and, Uber Eats, those kinds of things. And that seems, it's wonderful for you to bring lasagna too. Don't get me wrong, but we had a freezer full of lasagna. And I'll tell you, those gift cards, because the last thing you can do is think about preparing a meal for your kids. So to have those, so it's like the two ends of the spectrum, the most practical thing you can do, and then something that's so personal. And I think both are important.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so, so lovely. And I know there's a friend who sends you a card every year.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I will say, in all my grief, what happens, and especially in the Jewish religion, you sit Shiva. So that means for 7 days, your whole community is there. And it's amazing because you are wrapped in a cocoon of community. You are outside of normal civilization. And it's just a really lovely encircling. And then I think what happens is people go back to their normal lives. And over the course of the year, people tend to think about, your first birthday, your first Mother's Day, your first, and people, a few people will show up, but grief ebbs and flows and morphs and changes, but it's always there. And so when people remember year over year, and I think, and all you need to do is put a reminder in your calendar of a key date of, for example, Dalia's birthday, and when somebody remembers, because in many respects, year 2 is harder because now nobody's around anymore. Nobody thinks that I need to reach out and might be a tough day for you. So when people do, it means so much more, right? And so remembering over time.
Yes, 100%. There was one more that you had shared and it really resonated with me. My mom has been battling dementia and it's been like 4 years now. It's also degenerative. Primary progressive aphasia is, her diagnosis. And a friend of mine periodically sends me photos of her. Oh, and it's the best because I see her smiling, laughing. She's healthy, and it's like, that's how I remember her, not frail and suffering as I see now. And so I love seeing those reminders.
I love that so much. And it's so important because I think, people feel like they don't want to, quote unquote, remind you. So sometimes people won't send a picture or a video, as you mentioned, that they've come across. And when there is like nothing more meaningful to me than receiving that, because now I get to create a new memory, right? I'm never going to get a brand new picture or a video of my daughter. But if you send me a picture, then that's the only way that I get to have another little teeny tiny piece. And the other thing I would say is, please say their name. A lot of people feel like, I don't want to remind you, or I don't want to make you sad. What that does is it's erasing the person, right? Because now we're not talking about the person as we are my other kids. Saying the person who's died or the person who's ill or, in whatever the personal situation is, saying their name and asking about them. I went out to dinner just recently with somebody and we were talking about my other kids and some applications and what are their passions. And then he looked at me and he said, "What was Dalia passionate about?" And I was blown away. I really was, that it's very unusual. And then we got to talk about what Dalia was passionate about for the next 15 minutes. And it was the highlight of the night for me.
Tell us about a mom sense moment that you had where you just trusted blindly your intuition. And I feel like you use it around the clock.
Starting at the beginning, right? We have the mom sense that we know when something is in need of attention. And it was interesting because I thought about it a lot. And I thought about that mom sense that we have. And can it be true? I mean, people talk about the biological response of knowing when something's happening with your kid, even when they're not with you. And I thought, well, if it's a biological response, can it be true for an adoptive parent? Yes, it can. Nobody knows your kid. And so I think for me, when I look at initially when my worries and my concerns were poo-pooed and they're there and all of that, give it more time, she'll catch up. And I knew something was different and something wasn't right. And so keeping at the pursuit of trying to get to the bottom of what was going on, I think for me is a really profound part of Dalia's and my story.
Do you ever think, why me? Because so many people I feel have, and it ebbs and flows like a victim mindset. But I just don't see that in you.
I gotta say, I do not think why me at all. I think why not me? And I think that in two respects, because when the why me, I think can happen kind of on both ends of the spectrum, if you will, meaning people think, why me? Why should this happen to me? Why am I suffering? There's that end. And then I also think when we look at our success, people think, well, who am I? Who am I to put myself out there? Who am I to why? That's not going to happen for me. And I kind of feel like, why not me? First of all, I look around. I don't even have to go to, other far-flung parts of the world to see intense suffering. It's everywhere. So why should I think that I'm immune from that? Why not me? But then I also think when, you asked earlier, and I talked about confidence, that I'm so grateful that my parents instilled in me. And I think, why not me? So, I talk to a lot of people, for example, who are like, oh, I want to write a book, but who wants to know my story? And I'm like, why not? Right? So I don't think why me, but I know where you're coming from with the question is, why should all of this tragedy happen to me? And why not me? It's happening to a lot, there's a lot of suffering.
Yes, I love that. And I think it's just so inspiring, empowering, because we do have the power, the inner strength to get through anything and celebrate anything. There's this saying in Hindi it's bhagwan ek haath se deta hai, ek haath se leta hai. God gives with one hand and takes with the other. The challenges are actually the most powerful lessons. So they're not something that you have to be scared of. Okay, so I want to have everyone know where they can find you now and where they can find Breathtaking.
Breathtaking is available wherever you love to get your books. So, whether that's bookshop.org and for the indie book lovers or Barnes & Noble or Amazon, it's in all the places. And I do quite a bit of writing, as you said, and so you can follow me. And I love connecting with people on social, whether that's Instagram or Facebook. Check out my website, jessicafeinstories.com. And then I invite people to listen to my podcast, which is I Don't Know How You Do It.
So thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your story and really helping us, because life will throw a lot of things at you. And I feel like we really undermine who we are as human beings and how we can find the joy in the journey. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some great takeaways from our conversation. Join my community by logging on to thatstotalmomsense.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast, wherever you listen, and be sure to rate and review. On socials, my handle is @KanikaChaddaGupta on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and X. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My episode videos are on YouTube and YouTube podcasts with highlights on YouTube Shorts. Write to me at thatstotalmomsense@gmail.com. My team and I read all your pitches and feedback and are so glad to be in touch. Remember, always trust your mom sense and dad sense. Stay strong, super parents. See you soon.